Republican Congressman Tom Cole of Oklahoma. Happy holidays. Good to see you with us.
Hey, great to be with you guys.
Want to talk about your agenda for 2017 in just a second, but first get you on the record on some of the news of the day and the vote, the abstention by the United States at the UN on Friday. Did the United States do the right thing there in condemning, while abstaining from a vote that would condemn Israeli settlements?
No, it didn't do the right thing. Frankly, it's a break in our long-time policy, not on the settlement issue, but of making sure that UN resolutions are not one-sided. This clearly was. To do it the last 30 days of your presidency, when you know the incoming administration holds a different position, I think was reckless and reprehensible. And I'm going to be interested to see whether or not the Israeli charge that the United States actually colluded in this is true. I think it's too early to tell, but it's certainly nothing here that's reassuring about the way in which we handle this issue, in my view.
Do you believe, Congressman, that President Obama, over his 8 years in office, has been a friend to Israel?
Look, I think he's certainly been supportive in terms of defensive weapons and those kinds of things. But no, I think you look at the Iranian agreement, I think that was very reckless, and I think it endangered Israel. He's let it out personally a couple of times when microphones caught him that he certainly didn't like. President Netanyahu kept him waiting one time famously in the White House while the president and his family had dinner, didn't invite the prime minister to join them. So, no, I think it's been, a series of calculated insults, and I think this was a last insult on the way out the door. And I don't think it makes the president look very well, and certainly to do something that you know is deliberately at odds with what the incoming president is going to do on a stage this big, I think shows a certain pettiness that I'm surprised to see in President Obama, who usually rises above these sorts of things.
Congressman Casey Hunt, you and your fellow Republicans have a large in front of you that was, to a certain extent, not really anticipated. You've spent a lot of time being essentially in opposition and now are making this move to being a governing party. How difficult has that process been so far? I know you're now saying we need to look back to move forward. What is, for Republicans, the first challenge at the top of the list to figure out how to actually start taking some of the responsibility that you'll have to take?
Well, the first challenge is to recognize there's a Republican president. 3/4 of our conference has never served with a Republican president. That's how new this majority is. Look, it's a totally different thing when your side occupies the White House. And it's really important to be cohesive. You can't expect the Democrats to pass the president's agenda. Now, there'll be areas where we can get some help, certainly on infrastructure and perhaps on some areas of tax reform. But by and large, they're going to be an opposition party. And you certainly can't shut down the government when you run the government. So I think, we're going to have to work together a little bit more than we're used to doing. And we have a great opportunity, honestly, on everything from tax reform to infrastructure to actually border security, to get some really big things done from the American people. If we fail to do that, I think we'll be judged very harshly, and honestly, I think we should be.
Congressman Chris Jansen here. I just want to follow up on what you said about President Obama and, the relationship with Israel and the comments and the actions that he took, particularly at the UN last week. But I wonder how you assess Donald Trump. There has long been, and certainly President Obama's talked about the graciousness of George W. Bush and the whole idea of one president at a time and allowing the person who is in office to continue to serve his country for the office that he was elected to. Has Donald Trump crossed that line?
I don't think so. Actually, I would despite this incident, with them pretty high marks. I mean, the president-elect has certainly praised the president and the first lady repeatedly for the manner in which they've conducted the transition, and frankly, even on one occasion went outside of, went the extra step, shall I say, to defend the first lady when she said something that I agree with him was probably inartful, wasn't meant. I mean, the idea that the country has no hope, I think, is probably a line she wishes she had back. But Donald Trump didn't exploit that. Frankly, he defended her. And so I think by and large they've done well, but this is a big deal. This is policy with our strongest ally in the region. This is a country that Americans feel a special tie to. This is one where the president-elect made it very clear he would do something different before the vote. We didn't have to abstain. We have not abstained in the past. So again, this one looks a little bit more personal to me. But look, I don't think the president-elect is not allowed to say the things that he's going to do. And I think by and large he's been careful not to criticize President Obama during the transition, but he also has an obligation on something this major to make it crystal clear that this is a very transitory moment, that once there's a new president of the United States, the policy will revert to what it's historically been. No UN resolutions that are one-sided aimed against Israel.
Congressman Cole, Rick Tyler, what is the relationship going to be with a, you say, newly minted majority with the Democrats, and what are some of the items you might work with Democrats on right away?
Well, I think probably the easier ones are going to be infrastructure, tax reform. We'll actually get some Democratic support on border security. Border security is popular with liberals and conservatives, quite frankly. The real question's always been the other things that you put with it. Now I think we're apt to approach that problem piecemeal. Obviously, Israel is one where we already know we've got support. There's a lot of Democratic support for the state of Israel and a lot of Democratic criticism for the president's action this last week in that area. So I think there's going to be areas that we can work together. But again, by and large, opposition parties oppose. And I don't think you can base your strategy on winning Democratic votes. I think you've got to build a cohesive majority and move things through, particularly controversial things. And the repeal of Obamacare, for instance, is not going to attract a lot of Democratic votes. So we got to hang together as a team and get big things done for the country.
Tom, this is Gene Robinson. So let's get back to the governing party. The Republican caucus in the House look, I have compared it to Afghanistan with its warring factions and warlords and everything like that. Well, you know, in the spirit of Christmas and the New Year, let's just say it's complicated. And it's got members who have very strong views about spending, very strong views about small government. How are you going to get them all on the same page with a president who's not an orthodox Republican?
Well, I think, frankly, first of all, people look at elections, and elections have consequences. And, Donald Trump won. And by and large, we do agree with one another on most of the big issues. Actually, the big disagreements amongst Republicans have tended to be tactical. They've not tended to be philosophical. What's the appropriate way to oppose, how far you can go, can you accept a compromise when that's the best that's possible in divided government? Those issues disappear, at least for the next 2 years, if Republicans stay unified. And I've seen very few things that Donald Trump has said that most Republicans don't agree with. Now, again, it's going to be a challenge because I don't think people are used to having a president that can reach into their districts the way that I think Donald Trump. I mean, he's very popular with the Republican base, and a guy that can sit there and tweet out of the White House and generate several thousand calls to your office is somebody you ought to take pretty seriously because I suspect he's going to be very serious about pushing his agenda. But again, I think we'll come together pretty well. We seem to be working well together in the transition. The Trump transition team is communicating very well with our leadership. And finally, with guys, particularly with Vice President-elect Pence, that looks like, in retrospect, a really brilliant pick. I thought so during the campaign, but I think particularly now, somebody that's known and respected. The president-elect has a very good person to push his agenda on Capitol Hill in Vice President-elect Pence.
Congressman Cole, before we let you go, I want to ask you about something President Obama said in a new interview, that he would have beaten Donald Trump if he'd been allowed to run for a third term. You think he would have beaten Trump?
Nah, look, I think people get pretty tired of you after 8 years, no matter how good the show's been. And I think that was a little bit graceless where Secretary Clinton was concerned. I'm surprised he did it. Look, these guys are all got pretty strong egos. If you're president of the United States, they all think they can win anything all the time. But there's a reason that only Franklin Roosevelt pulled this off. Even other presidents like Grant that did too and then tried to come back after 4 haven't been able to do it. So I suspect probably not. But again, it's an interesting parlor game. We'll just simply never know. I'm surprised he raised it publicly because I don't think it reflected well on him.
All right, Congressman Tom Cole in Oklahoma City, appreciate you taking some time to